Okay, welcome back. It's a beautiful lunch. A few quick announcements before we get started this afternoon. Please fill out the survey cards. I know that I'm one of those guys that doesn't usually do that, but it's really helpful for us. We really pay attention to it, so please do your best to fill out the survey cards. Just leave them on the chair. It's all good. If there's a Mr. John Rossetti in the audience, we have your credit card. So you can get that at the registration desk. There's also a woman that lost a phone. That's at the hotel desk. And apparently the photo booth has been moved. It's outside in the cafe, or in the by the pool. So please stop by and do that. We've got a great afternoon agenda. I'm really excited about it, and I'm going to move right into introducing Steve Gross. Before I do, has anybody besides Jason, myself, and Steve been here for all 7 of our conferences? Paul Leach. We've got a couple people. Wow, that's fantastic. Nice. So Steve has been here for every single one of those. Really good friend to ShipCompliant, and we're extremely appreciative of Steve giving us updates every year. Steve Gross should be known to any of you who have attended our past conferences and anyone concerned with the politics behind direct-to-consumer shipping. As the longtime Director of State Relations for the Wine Institute, Steve has been involved in nearly every initiative to open states for winery-to-consumer shipping over the past 20 years. His expertise on the issues of wine politics and direct-to-consumer shipping regulations is unsurpassed. We are always very happy, very honored to have him. Today is no exception. Please help me welcome Steve Gross from Wine Institute.
Hello, everybody. I figured out how not to knock my water bottle over. Happy to be here as always. I'm going to start with a qualifier today. I've had like a bronchitis thing going on here, so I just finished my mentholyptus cough drop and I have my bottle of water, but if I start to bark, please pardon me, I'll try to get away from the microphone. What I want to do today is go through some recent events, kind of at a quick pace. The good news for all of you is more and more states are open. You can already ship more places, so I can make my presentations a little shorter every year so you can hear a little less from me. There's going to leave some room for some other people who have some really interesting and exciting things. Mine isn't quite as jazzy as Sasha's presentation from this morning because I'm here to talk about laws and regulations, but I'll do what I can. First thing I'm going to do is try to scare you into being a good compliant person. Talk about some recent changes that have taken place at the state level. A little bit of what's next, what we think is coming, and what you can do as individual winery folks and practitioners. And then I'll take some questions right afterwards and later on today too. First of all though, why should this matter? Why are you here? The compliance does matter. Your licenses are at stake, and if you didn't really believe that, there were a couple of events in the last year that maybe would help you believe it. TTB's newsletter that came out in January talked about the fact that if you do direct-to-consumer shipping in the states, you have to comply with those state laws, and the best part of their whole pitch in that release that they put out was that last line that reminds you that your license is at stake if you're not in compliance with the state laws in which you're doing business. Now, a lot of you might say, how are they going to know? Well, the reason they're going to know is because more and more states are getting active. You might be one of those lucky states or one of those lucky wineries here in California that the Texas Department of Revenue is coming to audit this summer. There are people coming from Texas that are going around to various wineries doing audits of your direct shipping for the last 3 years. What you did better match what you reported to the state of Texas. And they're looking at the records that you've provided, the records the shippers have provided, and others. So there is great reason for you to be using the services of a company like ShipCompliant that does everything that makes it easy for you to be compliant, and we just urge you to do that. So did I scare anybody? I hope I scared somebody at least a little bit. My presentation is the maps and everything you'll see are really about what the rules are for wineries making shipments. At Wine Institute, our members are California wineries, so that's kind of how we've tilted the way we do our presentations. If you are a retailer, it is still legal for you to ship into some states, but it's a dramatically different list than what you're going to see up on the slides. Those states are listed here in blue. There's a couple states where there have been some changes, and I've noted those on those slides in the same blue. But just be aware, if you're a retailer, or in California, people still call themselves a virtual winery, meaning somebody else made your grapes, you don't have a Class O2 license. Other states look at you as a retailer, and you need to behave as a retailer. Even if you think you're a winery and you want to be a winery, if you don't have an O2, you're not a winery in the eyes of the other states. So you just need to be sure you're following the right set of rules. All of these slides are going to be available to everybody after the conference, so don't freak out if you think you have to memorize everything I'm saying real fast. But this is what the world looks like right now. 2012 is a lot better than 1985. 1985, you couldn't go anywhere legally. It was all red. But right now, there's only 11 states left that it's completely forbidden to you to go. And then there's a few that are in transition. I'll talk about a couple of those too. But a lot of progress has been made. One thing that's an exception to the map I just mentioned is the federal on-site provision. We used to talk about this a lot because there used to be a lot of states that were in this category. Now we're down to just 3. Once a state passes a legal direct shipping format with legislation, they roll off this list, and New Jersey just did that. So that's one that might have been on your list before for on-site visits. You need to make sure that you've changed that and it's no longer on your list. I'll talk about New Jersey a couple times in the course of this presentation, but just make sure if you ever have this list anywhere, that now should just be Delaware, Oklahoma, and South Dakota are the only ones that are affected by this provision. And again, anytime you're tracking on-site sales, for this exception or any of the other state-specific exceptions for on-site, and that means a sale where the customer is visiting you at your tasting room, Rhode Island, Kansas, Georgia, Arizona also have some kind of an on-site provision, for example. When you're doing that, you need to keep some kind of record to prove that the people were there on site. What we've suggested you do is just have a little tear sheet that somebody signs, said I made a purchase this day. At the winery, at the very least, you need to have the original credit card receipt that would have a signature on it. If you have a credit card that says signature on file, like you have for all the other ones you run for your remote sales, you're not going to pass an audit if one of those states comes to audit, and they do. So what I want to do today is kind of simplify and not do a big presentation, but just talk about the changes that happened in 2011. Some of them since we were last together, and some of you might not have been here last year, so I'll go through a few of those, and then talk about 2012. The big one in 2011 was something bad that didn't happen. There was legislation that was introduced in Florida that would have severely decreased the ability for wineries to do business in that state would it have passed. Florida is an odd duck. It's not a state that ever passed legislation to make it legal to ship in, but their equivalent of the California ABC, the Texas Department of Business and Professional Regulation, issued a ruling after a previous lawsuit that allows people to ship in under those rules. The wineries have to file a report of what they shipped in and pay the excise taxes. The consumers do the other part. But it is, unlike the other states, there isn't really a licensing structure there. So we would like to see a licensing structure and kind of formalize it. Our opponents to shipping would like to see it go away entirely or be made so complicated that no one can ship and take advantage of the license. So we have that battle every year in the legislature, it seems. We got lucky we didn't have one in 2012, but in 2011 it was a big fight, and we were able to prevail because the Speaker of the House actually stopped a bill that had a lot of momentum and had been moving. So Florida is still open to you, and that was the good news there in 2011. Another thing, in Indiana, this wasn't a big change, but there was a study that was done that was looking at a couple of the restrictions to the ability for folks to sell into the state. In Indiana, if you have a wholesaler and you sell through the 3-tier system, you're prohibited from selling into the state via their direct-to-consumer shipping program. They also have an on-site visit, so the consumer has to actually visit your winery one time to place the first order before you can ship them subsequent orders. And they do monitor that, and people have been cited for violating that part of their rules, so be very aware of that. Nonetheless, the hope was this study would take place and then the legislature could act on the results of it, and we would be able to improve the law by changing those two provisions that are problematic for so many wineries. The study came out very favorably on the on-site visit question, but they neglected at all to even talk about the wholesaler exclusion. So that was one of the things we're going to have to come back and address. We had hoped to have this brought up in a piece of legislation this year in 2012, but the committee that chairs or that hears all the alcohol bills in Indiana said they weren't going to hear any alcohol bills in 2012. So this has been put off for another year. But the good news is I think we're making some progress towards trying to improve that one down the line. In Louisiana, there was a change that was a good one for all of us. It took up the limit of how much you can ship into the state if you have a license, up from 4 to 12 cases per year. Changed the reporting requirements as an annual report, and then it allowed in-state retailers to ship. Oddly, out-of-state retailers had been able to ship into Indiana or into Louisiana, but in-state retailers couldn't ship. Now they both can with the same kind of a license structure. One other thing in Louisiana that's a clarification we've been going back and forth on with them is there is a wholesaler restriction, a product that you have in wholesale in the state, you're not able to ship, but we did get an interpretation from the previous director of the ABC that said if you have a product that's not listed with a wholesaler or with your wholesaler, you could ship the products that are not listed. So for example, in my fictitious winery, which will never take off and become big because I would have gross Chardonnay and gross Cabernet, for example, if my gross Cabernet were listed with the wholesaler in Louisiana, I could not get a license that would allow me to ship that in. But if I didn't list my gross Chardonnay with that same wholesaler, I could go ahead and get that license and ship the Chardonnay, for example. In Maryland, it was a big change in 2011 because that's one of the states we've been working on for a very long time. The good news it became effective on July 1st, 2011. And if you just set in the numbers presentation in there, it was up by something like 9,000%. Well, of course it was. It wasn't open the year before, but it's great because Maryland had a lot of pent up, I think, energy to do some purchases there. Took a long time to get the bill passed, but it's functioning and working pretty well for the folks that are using it. So that was a nice win and change for us in 2011. Little less successful, but nonetheless important, was the change in New Jersey. There was legislation passed in New Jersey in 2011 to allow wineries under 250,000 gallons to get a permit to ship into the state. We're opposed to those kind of capacity caps. We think that any winery, regardless of your size, should be able to ship into the state, and we're going to continue to work to try and get that changed. It's the same kind of a restriction that was the basis of the litigation in Massachusetts, which I'll talk about in a few minutes briefly. But these kind of things where you try to divide up wineries by size, they picked 250,000. Kentucky picked 5,000. So, it can be harmful to any winery depending upon where they choose to draw that line. We just firmly believe they shouldn't have those lines at all. So I'll talk in a few more minutes about the implementation this year in 2012, because this bill did not become effective until the 1st of June of this year. New Mexico was the sad goodbye to all the reciprocity states. I know you all loved them. They were simple. There was a handshake, no forms, no taxes, but unconstitutional, so we had to do away with it. Sometimes if you be careful what you ask for, you might get it. That was the one part of the Granholm decision that was a bit unfortunate for all of us, was that we had to we had to go into the legislatures and replace the reciprocity acts with the traditional permit structure. Good business for ShipCompliant, so they weren't unhappy that we did that, but nonetheless, it was the last of the remaining reciprocity states, and it converted over in July of last year too, and that's gone very smoothly. People are still shipping there. If you are a retailer, the rules in New Mexico for retailers did not change at all. The old reciprocity statute was left intact, so you were able to continue to ship as you had before. New York, there was kind of a couple things happened separately. One of the reports that you used to always have to file, which was the semi-annual shipment report, you no longer have to file with the state. You have to keep the records for 3 years in case you get an audit, but you don't have to file that report. You still have to file the tax forms and everything else that were required, but the report to the ABC is no longer required. The bigger issue in New York that we came across last year is, I just said that we said goodbye to reciprocity. Well, there's one tiny little exception to that, is that the New York law has some wording in it that says you can ship into New York if you're in a state that has a reciprocal privilege. Well, we're fine in California because they've always recognized California's law as providing that reciprocal privilege. Because they can ship an unlimited amount into California, we can ship up to 36 cases, or 36 bottles, or 36 cases back into New York. But there was an interpretation by the State Liquor Authority last summer. A new attorney got involved in looking at the regs, and he stopped approving applications for renewal of licenses from states that he deemed to be non-reciprocal. So Virginia, California, other states were getting stopped. We went to his boss and to the governor's office and were able to stop that interpretation and clarify that in fact the intention always was that you would have allowed the states that the New York wineries can ship into. He was saying that the fact that we had a different reporting requirement was the difference. So we were able to get that overturned. It has resurfaced slightly again this year. The same attorney tried to kind of do it again. Nothing against you attorneys that work for the ABC, Matt. I'm learning to be giving. But in this case, again, to date, we're still able to have people getting their licenses renewed and go forward, but it's something we're keeping a close eye on and trying to make sure we don't end up having a problem with it. If you looked at the data that was presented in the last program too, New York remains the #3 market for direct shipping, so it's obviously an important one for us to keep open. Tennessee opened up in 2009, and if you were looking at the presentation again just a few minutes ago, you saw that it was one of the states with the largest percentage growth of shipments going into the state last year. A part of that might have been that Tennessee, we were able to change the law. There had been a whole lot of Tennessee was dry. Most of the major metropolitan areas were wet, but a whole lot of the land area in the state, the various zip codes were dry. And it was very hard for people to determine where they could and could not ship. So we took a page out of our old playbook in Texas, and we had a bill passed that declared the entire state wet for wine shipping. So somebody might still live in a county where, for example, they couldn't have a package store or something, but it is legal for them to now order and have delivered to their home packages that are ordered from a winery out of state and shipped in under the program. That could have been responsible for that uptick in sales, or the folks at FedEx today said that some of their colleagues are simply ordering a whole lot more wine and drinking it, so that might also be the issue. But one way or another, Tennessee was up by about 40%, I think. But those were the big things from last year. There are not quite as many things in 2012 this year, because I said a lot of the states have gotten settled and there are a few that are still pending, but let me touch on what those are. The first one doesn't affect many people, but for those who it affected, it's a big deal. If you use a marketing company, and some of you do, to sell into a state, for example, if you use co-brand as your marketing company to sell into the East Coast, they would have been the company registering your brands in the state of Connecticut. And when that happened, you then could not get a direct consumer shipper's license from your winery. So a lot of people who had every intention of selling into Connecticut had been precluded from doing that. We were able to work with a new ABC administrator there and get a clarification that that is no longer the case. So if you had been held out of the market because of that type of a relationship, please either chat with us or whatever. Annie Bones, who's right here back here, works in my office, can help you walk through getting in touch with the right people in Connecticut so you can get that license. So it doesn't affect a lot of people, but if it does affect you, it's a nice one to have changed to. That's a very good market. Maine, this kind of is an example of part of what we've been trying to do at the state level now. Even though states are open, some of them had some pretty onerous paperwork requirements and licensing and permitting fees, or we're trying to change the numbers. There's kind of a trend here. If you look, Tennessee was already open, we tried to make it better. Louisiana was open, we tried to make it better. Maine was one, we did the same thing. A lot of people were doing the quarterly filings, had some very small tax filing numbers and things like that. We've gone back to states and made a case that they've agreed was a compelling one, that filing on an annual basis the amounts due for the direct consumer shipping is reasonable because the typical amounts due are small It's less checks to process. All the record keeping is there. So this would be an instance where starting this fall, we don't have the exact effective date of this. It's 90 days after the law or the bill became law, and that was just at the end of session a couple weeks ago. But we're not sure if they're counting just business days or we're waiting to get an exact count. But look at it like this. Starting in 2013, it'll be an annual report. So we're trying to get to this annual reporting, annual tax payments, wherever we can, because we realize that really simplifies what you have to do. You still need to use ShipCompliant, because they'll do it right annually. It's just they don't have to do it every quarter, so it's one thing less. We're not trying to put you out of business, Jeff. Okay, New Jersey. This is one that has been disappointing because it became much more complex than we had hoped it would be. I mentioned before the capacity cap, so if your winery is over 250,000 gallons, it's just like Ohio, you're not able to ship in. We want to go back in and fix that. We have a commitment from the previous bill sponsor that he'll work with us to do so in the next legislative session. But it also got frustrating because New Jersey did not publish their regulations or their permits or anything until the day the law became effective. So it's kind of hard to analyze everything and prepare. Once they did publish, though, we found out that the registration in New Jersey is the only state where that triggers a corporate income tax filing. So if you were a corporation and you were to file there, you're going to be subject for a tax of somewhere between like $500 and $2,000. It also triggers a reporting requirement and a filing fee for partnerships that every partner is responsible for a $150 filing fee. Some wineries have lots of partners, so that would be problematic. And in a totally unique twist, in New Jersey, they're requiring a copy of every alcoholic beverage license you hold in any of the 50 states. So they would want a copy of your direct-to-consumer shipper's permit for every state, your out-of-state supplier's license for every state. All of this is stuff that was never anticipated at the filing of the time of filing and the time that we passed the bill. So we're working with the previous author again to go in and do a fix-it bill to clean up a little bit of this. But in the meantime, there are wineries who have registered in New Jersey and are starting to avail themselves of the privilege of shipping there. We are just going to have to keep plugging away, and it's not going to be until after the first of the year that we're going to be able to get a new bill in. We have to do it after the elections, it looks like. So we'll be working on it, but just be aware if you're in one of those categories that's scary of being a corporation, a partnership, and you don't really want to do this, or if you're over the capacity cap of 250,000 gallons, keep an eye out because we're going to work on this in the future and try to get that one changed. The two states that are still pending are big ones for us here in 2012. In Massachusetts, we've had a bill that is there to fix what was theoretically fixed when we won the lawsuit against the capacity cap and the wholesaler exclusion 2 years ago. That was the Family Winemakers versus Jenkins case. The legislature had to act to clean it up, and the bill is stalled in committee because of a fight over used car sales legislation. And it's a joint committee in Massachusetts where there's a Senate co-chair and a House co-chair. One of them wants to pass the used car bill, the other one's totally opposed to the used car bill, and until they work this out, not a single bill has passed out of their committee. And the good news is they started with about 60 bills that were put on suspension of the rules so they would stay alive. There are now only 12 of those, so have continued to get a suspension so they could stay alive. We're one of those 12, but the calendar is ticking, so it's becoming harder and harder for us to get this bill passed. Even more interesting is that Pennsylvania actually has direct-to-consumer shipping legislation moving. The Senate has already passed a bill. The House Regulated Industries Committee has passed a bill. It's a very good bill, but for the fact that they're requiring an 18% sales tax. In Pennsylvania, they have something called the Johnstown flood tax. It was imposed in the 1930s after a devastating flood. I think those poor folks in Johnstown have probably been paid back by now, but it's kind of like the Golden Gate Bridge. You know, we paid for it a few times, and I think they're still paying for the flood tax. The irony here is that 18% flood tax is imposed currently on the wholesale price when the wine's brought into the state. They're applying it to this as in the same manner, but it would be applied at your full retail markup. So we've tried to articulate to them the problems with doing that it's going to put their pricing way out of whack with all of the adjacent states. We may be able to convince them of that, we may not, because there's a lot of passion about the Johnstown flood tax back there. But nonetheless, there is a very good opportunity that we're going to have some kind of direct consumer shipping in Pennsylvania by the end of the year. And if you'd have had me be a betting man, I wouldn't have said yes to that a couple of years ago. But there are a lot of pressures with privatization discussions and stuff in those states that are leading them to want to modernize the Pennsylvania system, and that's what's going on. So keep you posted on that one. There'll be information in the Wine Institute, information that goes out. That brings us to, this is what the map looks like now. There are 39 states that you can already legally ship into. There are a couple others, Massachusetts that I just mentioned, that in theory you should be able to ship to, but we have to get the Fix-It bill done. Pennsylvania, same thing. We have to get the legislation passed for you to get there. Kentucky, in theory you could ship there if you were under 5,000 cases and you had the right permits, but none of the common carriers are currently shipping to Kentucky, so you shouldn't be shipping to Kentucky without an approved common carrier, so we leave that on our don't ship to list. And some of these other states are the states we're going to be working on in the coming years. We're going to continue to try and open up the new states. There are some states that I still think it's going to be not on my lifetime. I mean, I'm still pretty safe in saying I don't think Utah's going to open up for your direct consumer shipping anytime soon. And I'm sticking to my guns on that one, at least until I'm really proven wrong. But the other thing we're really trying to do, though, is get in and fix and improve the statutes in the states where it's problematic, where the reporting requirements are onerous, where the licensing requirements perhaps are out of whack. Trying to simplify and streamline the ability for you to go in and do business. Third-party fulfillment issues, there's going to be a panel later today on third-party issues, but at the state level, they have been issues. For example, fulfillment houses were for a while precluded from being able to ship into Virginia. We had to go in year before last, and pass legislation to fix that, to allow fulfillment houses there. We're currently in the same situation in the state of North Dakota. I'm going to be meeting with some folks from North Dakota next week in Washington at the National Conference of State Liquor Administrators to try and work out a plan forward of how to solve that for North Dakota. But these are states that just aren't familiar with the concept of a fulfillment house, that it's still your wine and your license and all those things involved. And a big part of fixing this is working with the carriers, with the fulfillment houses, with the winery clients, so that the reporting track is clear so that they can tell in North Dakota which winery shipped that through the fulfillment house, so it'll match up with the carrier's records, so they're not getting a report in North Dakota that just says Steve Gross Fulfillment House shipped 400 cases into the state, because I don't have a license if I'm the fulfillment house. It's the wineries that need to be the ones that are showing on all the reporting. So we're working on those issues, just be aware of it. I talked before about the ways we're trying to improve some of the existing statutes. That's ongoing. Getting rid of capacity caps, getting rid of bond requirements. Some states have very high bond requirements because that's what the in-state wineries are having to pay for their winery bond. They tend to apply that same thing to the direct consumer bonds. Where possible, we've been trying to get those repealed, and if not able to repeal it, then do something similar to what was done in Texas. For example, where after 3 years of timely tax payment, you may ask for a waiver from having to file future bonds. And other states are starting to follow that model where you can, in fact, if you've shown timely tax payments, you can waive the need to do additional bonding going forward. And the last thing, to the point I was just talking about, we're continuing to work with the common carriers in order to make sure that the states are getting from them the information the state needs to be able to match up with the information you're filing on your reports, so that everybody can have confidence that, in fact, we're all following the rules and doing what we're supposed to be doing. I was asked, are there any kind of game-changing issues that are out there? And just in the last couple of minutes, let me touch on a couple of those. Privatization. There are control states for wine that have been involved in direct consumer shipping. It's a huge issue right now for the spirits companies, because their world is changing dramatically if they're looking at the control states, because they're in 18 states and in Montgomery County with the control system. Ours is much smaller. Wine is in the control system completely, where the state is the wholesaler and the retailer in Utah, in New Hampshire, in Montgomery County to a certain degree, and then in Pennsylvania. There are a couple of states where the state is just the wholesaler. That's Wyoming and Mississippi. A couple of the control states have been very early adopters and good supporters of ours on direct consumer shipping. New Hampshire and Wyoming are states that were early in and have worked out well. If we could open up Pennsylvania, obviously it's a big thing for us. The way privatization is affecting us in these states, honestly, is as the states are getting pushed to modernize and to address what's seen as kind of an archaic system, they're talking about modernization, and that in Pennsylvania, it's the pressure to privatize that led the PLCB to come to the table to talk to us about direct-to-consumer shipping. So that issue in those states, it's in fact a beneficial discussion for us, even though it's not changing the way, if the state were to privatize, it doesn't completely change the way you would sell your wine through the state on direct-consumer shipping issues. Common carriers, they're the key to our success. If we don't have their partnership in this going forward, we can't ship our wine. And so keeping them engaged, keeping the states confident that they're doing what needs to be done in order to assure the delivery goes to an adult, to provide the reporting so that they can track the quantities. That's a key part of what we've been working on and are continuing to work on. Packaging. More states are looking to try and expand their bottle deposit laws. There are solid waste bills that are coming in some states that any kind of packaging being sent into the state may start to get fees for disposal fees and things as solid waste becomes an issue. So those are kinds of expenses you may have to start looking at of whether or not you're going to have some kind of an incremental mill tax on your bottles when they go into a state, for example. We fight hard to keep that from happening, but it's something that is being proposed on a relatively regular basis. And future litigation. Right now, there really has been very little litigation active in the last couple years in the wake of the Granholm case, but there are a few cases that aren't really about direct-to-consumer shipping, but that are about the Granholm principles. Southern Wine and Spirits is suing the state of Missouri, saying that on the residency requirement that you have to be an in-state resident to hold a license, and they're basing that on Granholm. They just lost in the lower court. We're waiting to find out if they're going to appeal. At the same time, the Attorney General of Tennessee just did a 180 to that and told the state legislator that an in-state requirement for wholesalers and retailers to be a resident is unconstitutional. So those are the kinds of issues that may go up that would lead the court to further refine what they meant about Granholm, who it applied to, how it applies, and that could affect us and our ability to ship. So we're keeping an eye on it. This is the list I always give at the end. It says, if anybody comes up to you and tells you that they could ship direct for you to somebody's home in any one of these states, please have them call me and then explain to me, and I'll get back to you and tell you whether or not they convinced me they had a legal way to do it. Because this is our list of, I don't think there is a legal way to do a shipment to someone's home from you at the winery. So just kind of, that's a nice little test that you can have in your pocket. What can you do? You can go to join Free the Grapes. This is Shackles, the Angry Grape. It's a very effective organization in advocating for direct consumer shipping. If you don't get their regular newsletter that gives you a lot of tools you could use with your mailing lists and others, I urge you to go to the freethegrapes.org and sign up to get the information. If nothing else, it gives you an ongoing source of information. You can pay attention to the ShipCompliant blog that gives you current updates on everything that goes on with regard to direct consumer shipping. The folks at ShipCompliant do a great job writing things. Annie writes a number of things for the blog to do the updates. It's a great source of timely information about whenever there's a change in the rules about direct consumer shipping. And I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't suggest, if you're not a member of the Wine Institute, join the Wine Institute. We're doing this work on behalf of all the wineries, but only a fraction of you are paying to help get that done. So we'd love to have everybody in the room on board with the Wine Institute in the same way that you are, because you're benefiting from a lot of hard work that's done by my folks out around the country. This is my team of people that work on this. We have 6 regional offices. They're all professional, full-time Wine Institute people that then supervise contract lobbyists. This year we had 46 contract lobbyists working for us in 43 states. And this direct consumer issue has probably been the most time-consuming issue we've worked on, perhaps other than tax issues, over the last 20 years that I've been working on this issue. I've been at Wine Institute for 25 years, and this is the one thing that we continue to get the most requests from members and wineries for assistance in interpreting the laws and the rules. So that's my commercial. I have exactly like 2 seconds left, so I'll stop. Anybody have a couple questions? I think I have a minute or two before they roll into the panel, so I'm happy to take a couple questions, then I'll do some later. In the back?
One of your slides said in Connecticut, advertising emails have to include a copy of your license.
You have to have your license number. And that's the same for Washington State, actually.
Like emails to your customers, direct to consumer customers?
Yeah, anything.
Email to my customer?
Yeah, and what we suggest you do, if you have just a signature line that you send and it's ever going to reference a sale or a promotion of any of your products or anything like that, embed at the bottom in itty bitty type if you want to, both your Washington license number and your Connecticut license number in very pale script even if you want to, but that way you're always covered because anything you would send into those states would be protected. Those are the two states that have that requirement. And again, it's your direct-to-consumer shipping license number that they want to have shown. In Washington, it's your certificate of authority number. Over there and then here. Yeah.
Yeah, under the carrier selection, you said USPS with a question mark.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, they're going to talk about that, I think, a little more. Carrie might touch on this afternoon, but the Senate passed a version of the new post office authorization that includes in there a proposal that the United States Post Office would remove the prohibition against allowing shipments of wine, beer, and spirits. They're currently prohibited from shipping any alcohol, and this would allow them to ship from wineries, was the original way it was drafted. I believe its current language is wineries and retailers, but it's not in the House version. So we don't know yet if that's going to happen. And even if it were to pass, there are a whole lot of questions about what it would take to have the post office become an approved shipper, for example, and file the reports in the states into which they would be shipping. It's an odd proposal to have the U.S. Post Office reportable to Matt Botting. But it'd be fun to watch. I'd watch. I don't know. So there's a lot of questions out there. We just don't know what there are. But in theory, it could be a bit of a game changer too, because currently we're limited to our partners at FedEx and UPS that we've been working for before, heretofore. One other question, and then I'll take some more at the end, maybe. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, one thing, even before we wait for a fix-it bill in New Jersey, just to kind of...
Can you repeat the question?
The question was, there's someone who, in New Jersey, they're under 250,000 gallons, so they're a corporation that could qualify for the license, but their CFO is nervous about getting it because of the potential tax liabilities. We've retained the services of an in-state tax authority lobbyist kind of guy who, this is the kind of stuff he always works on, and he's working with us right now to see if we can get the Department of Revenue to back off of that interpretation. There is a privilege with the new license that by paying an additional fee, you could also open a tasting room in New Jersey, which is an entirely different thing. But we're saying that kind of an action should be when if you were to open a tasting room in the state, then that would be when you would kick in the corporate tax liability, for example, as opposed to simply being a direct shipper. So we're trying to massage the agency. You might just want to wait to see if we have any luck with that before we go to the legislature, before you file. Just sit on your hands for a little bit and see, well, if we get it changed, we'll put out a notice very quickly. Okay, I'm going to step back and I'll be around though, and a couple opportunities to do questions later if you'd like to.